Assalamu alaikum. Greeting of peace and a very good morning. Thank you, Ratna. Thank you, all of you, for staying on. Normally, after 3 foreign speakers, you will go, so that I'll be left alone. But anyway, thanks so much, Bat, Helish, and Batson, for opening up another window of what we in this university, or at least in Malaysia, will need to think about as we move into the future. I think as we talked about the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan as being relevant to the future, there is something that I want to come back to the whole idea of why we have this particular seminar, so that we can see where the relevance of falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, which is a national education philosophy, and how do we then contextualize this as things move on. I think these are new ideas, knowledge democracy, responsibility, autonomy, freedom, in a context which is quite different from what it used to be, maybe in the 11th century and so on and so forth. Yeah? So what I want to do today is to come back and see how relevant is falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, given the context that I'm going to pick today is about how do we move on in the idea of putting sustainability as the main pillar of education in the future. This was signed up in 2016 by United Nations in September 2015. I think most of the world leaders have signed on to it, including Malaysia. But three years into this particular process, I don't think much has been done, at least in the context of education. At least in the context of the university, I'm not too sure about the school, but there's very little that is done in the context of tertiary education. And we have got 2030 to sort of evaluate where we have gone. And I think these 3 years is a precious 3 years that we're going to miss if we do not come to terms of what is it that we're going to do. Now, if you look at this context, you will see, for example, our falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan is somewhere there. Does this work? Yeah, very faintly. Yeah, there's the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, which is 30 years ago. And that particular point there, you have also this whole idea of UNESCO 4 pillars of learning. In 1996, I think a report called the Jacques Delors report was released, and in that there is this whole concept of 4 pillars of learning for the 21st century. And it's almost coincidental in that particular year. And then moving on, we have the Millennium Development Goal, which is the year 2000, until 2014. And 2014 from on, we will have now the Sustainable Development Goal. Now, where does falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan feature into this? Is it relevant, or is it something that we need to throw out and get a new one because the world has moved on and we are not even in sync with what is happening? So my little presentation basically to see how we can contextualize in all these changes that we have got. Now they've got Malaysia Baru, the new Malaysia, and therefore much of the things that Bat is talking about is something that we need to put into practice, how we can actually give new ideas, new thoughts, challenge the old one, even challenge the status quo if you want to get something to move on. We cannot be living in the past, although the past is good for us in a way, but there are certain things that we need to make amends of, because I think there are lessons that also we need to learn from the past. Now, if you go back to the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, before that, I think in that shift that I talked to you about, I begin to detect a number of things. Before we go into the Industrial Revolution, and I want to bring this back because we are all in the midst of talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution. And I'm not too sure many of us will understand what this Industrial Revolution is all about. But if you go back to the beginning of the first Industrial Revolution, which is in the 1700s, before that, you will see education is contextualized in a different way. The days of the Greeks, even before the Greeks, people are talking about questions which is big questions about the universe, about where do we come from, what is the role of human beings in that particular context. And therefore, the university takes a different sort of idea of what responsibility that has to be executed as far as the university is concerned. And university, from my little understanding, comes from the community. It is part of the community. It is created so that it works for the community to bring the community up together with the university. The university is successful, the community must be successful at the same time. You cannot have a big building, a nice complex like this, call it a university, while our community around us, either we don't even know they exist, or we totally ignore them, or if we even recognize them, we don't really care. All we want to think is about how we make into the ranks, how we become reputational, how each of us make our own living, but the community has nothing to do with us. And so we go back to where university started off. It is a whole question of wisdom that we have now lost. And we talk about university today, like many of my colleagues say, it's all about the economics of logic of economics. Yeah? Talk about research, it is about how much money you can bring. Talks about innovations, how much things that you can sell. Talks about international students, how much revenue can we make out of them. And everything else is around economics. The wisdom that we talked about in ancient times is all gone. And that's the first shift that you noticed. And this shift is becoming more apparent from the kind of terminology that we used. At one point, you talk about human being, human person. Now we talk about human capital. Everybody talks about human capital. Yeah? Even minister's speech, prime minister's speech sometimes talk about human capital. And human capital and human person are very two different concepts and ideas and ideology. The human capital, as far as I understand, comes from the human capital theory. And again, it's about the logics of economics, not the human person per se. And then we begin to look at what is well-being. Our well-being now is all defined by how much money in the pocket, in the bank, or wherever. Yeah? I've got a friend who works in a very rich, small, oil-rich country, and he wasn't too happy because the countries are normally too small, for them to move about. But here's what he said to me, Zul, if I'm unhappy, all I need to do is open my bank book. Yeah? And I'm happy again. So you begin to define what well-being is all about, again in the context of economic, finances, and so on and so forth. And therefore, the university are all crafted within this particular concept of what the new terms and the new terminology is all about. At one point, then, we lose this whole culture of humility. We just celebrate our Humility Day last week, yeah? And we get into the question of arrogance. We think we know all the solutions to all the problems around us. And we begin to ignore people outside us, including this indigenous community, including the indigenous wisdom, and all the rest of it that is now ignored, being not, quote-unquote, part and parcel of the so-called modern knowledge. We go into arrogance, and the result is, of course, the whole ecosystem suffers. And therefore, we get into an age of unsustainability, and this is where we are at one point. Besson had got a slide, talked about the Holocene and the Anthropocene. We are now moving into the Anthropocene age. In summary, the Holocene age is where we build civilization. The Anthropocene age is where we begin to destroy civilization because of the things that we do and the kind of ideas that has been infused in our head, given the kind of quote-unquote modernization that we have today. I see this shift as something which is real. And therefore, we need to now look at where we need to go as far as that is concerned. Yeah? How do we then create this shift again so that the imbalance can be rectified? And this is what we're going to do in this particular course of lecture. Evidence is around us. Economy, ecology, social disparities, and the crimes and the violence and the thing that we see is all around us. And I think, to me, this is a hallmark of what the imbalance is all about. Yeah? And where do you create this imbalance and how do you recorrect this imbalance is the issue that I think we're going to talk about, and going back to that falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. The imbalance can be seen almost every day. The kind of distribution that we talked about, be it food, be it water, be it even the kind of lifestyle that we have, yeah? The number of suicides. I think the last alarming statistics we got from the state of Penang, 20% of the student population in Penang are depressed, 6% are thinking or contemplating suicide. And that is the latest statistic from Penang, a country which is a state which is very much prosperous as compared to many other states. Where have we gone wrong is an issue that I think we need to look at, and this is where I think the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan comes again. If we don't address this, then I think crisis will be right in front of our doorsteps. And in fact, it is already at our doorsteps, only that we are not sensitive enough to actually discern that. So let me go back to falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, the national education philosophy, and the two words that I can summarize it is all about humanizing education all over again. And therefore, if we miss this falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, we are beginning to get into a kind of the dehumanizing state. Yeah? And I got an acronym for education system in Malaysia, at least higher education system, what I call WEIRD. W is about Western-centric. Western-centric in the sense that it's more neoliberal, issues of human capital and so on and so forth. I is industrial-led. Somebody said yesterday in the conference, the moment you want to introduce a course, the question that comes from somewhere else, have you done the market survey? Yeah? If you've not done the market survey, then do the market survey. If the market survey says this is not to be offered, then we say, never mind, we are not going to offer this. So we lose the leadership that we've got as far as even deciding on what courses that need to be taught in the university. Then E is economic-centric. I've mentioned to you, everything is about money. All right? I know money is important, but that is not the first cause of why we need to run a university. R is reputational obsessed. Everybody talks about the rankings and the KPIs, the numbers that you can count, the percentages that you need to present. And D is dehumanizing. So all this, I think, are concerned for me. And where do you then place the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan or the national education philosophy in trying to humanize education all over again? These are the four things that we talked about yesterday. The four things that needs to be balanced, that is embedded in the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. We need to have a balance between intellectual capacity, spiritual capacity, being physical and also emotional. And look at your philosophy, and look at the curriculum, and look at the lifestyle in the university. Are all this balanced? Yeah? And this is a question I think that all of us have to answer and find a solution to it. Now, we talk about being balanced. The whole human person, not just part of it, not just between spiritual and emotional or emotional and physical, but it's a whole human balance. This is a picture that is drawn by Leonardo, the Vitruvian Man. Right? My contribution is a fig leaf, so that you are focused at the right time. Yeah? Yes. So this balance is about the human balance, and therefore in the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan it says that very clearly, that we want to produce a balanced and harmonic human person. Memupuk insan seimbang dan harmonis. That is the end point as far as falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan is concerned. How do you create this balanced human person? Now, when they go for convocation, we just had our convocation, and when I was sitting there, I thought our convocation is like a factory. Yeah? The student moves from one point to another point, get the degree, and off he goes. And that goes for thousands and thousands of them. You know, I feel very uncomfortable sitting there because this is just almost like a factory model. And when they receive the scroll from whoever, the question that we need to ask, is this student balanced? And I would think that most of the time, we will not be able to answer that question. Yeah? But the question we are asked today, basically, is the student employable? Nothing wrong with that. But if you have not balanced, then you get employed, then you're going to create a chaos in your workplace. And we see this in the context of corruption, in the context of unethical behavior, the bullying, the sexual harassment, name it. In every school, in every university, we begin to wonder whether education is education from the context of falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Where is the balance and how do you institute the balance is a question that I think we need to ask now. Yeah? So it is about individuals who are balanced and harmonious, using the words of the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Yeah? And that balance then will need to be supported by a value system. And this is where the value system that we are proposing, a context of what we call sejahtera. Okay? And the sejahtera have these elements of protecting life, protecting intellectual capacity, and promoting that as well, protecting and promoting future generation, the lineage, protecting wealth and property, and of course protecting faith and beliefs. That will be the supporting element to make sure that the balance is intact and goes on in that context. And this is where the word sejahtera comes in. Why the word sejahtera is important? Because you will see later on that the word sejahtera is already in the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, except that we have made no meaning out of it. After 30 years, 3 decades, I think we are still searching for the meaning of sejahtera. Yeah? So it's not just at the level of individual, you'll begin to see that it's also at the level of community. We talked about shared equity, shared prosperity, and also environment integrity or environmental ethics. This defines the balance within the microcosmos or the macrocosmos if the individual is about the macrocosmos. Again, there is this balance between the micro and the macro, and how do you sustain this balance is again where education comes in the context of the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Briefly, this is a falsafah. Normally we use the Bahasa Malaysia because the nuances are there, but for the audience today, we just talk about the English. Yeah? Basically, it talks about an ongoing effort, holistic and integrated. Ongoing is now, the new word is lifelong learning. Yeah? We use lifelong learning to talk about ongoing, continuous, from cradle to the tomb. It's been there 30 years ago. Yeah? We talk about holistic education now. It's there 30 years ago. We talk about integrated curriculum or whatever is there 30 years ago. In other words, I would venture to say that the vision of the falsafah is already there even before the 21st century arrives. But we are still looking. Yeah? Sekolah-sekolah sering ada classroom 21, abad ke-21. But I don't know where the abad ke-21 is when you look at this derjah-derjah ataupun kelas-kelas yang ada. Because the values are not there. They're very much, a kind of mechanistic way of defining what 21st century is all about. Yeah? To produce intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, physically balanced and harmonious, who have a firm belief in the devotion of God. All right? So in other words, spirituality is very much part and parcel of this falsafah. Such an effort is designed to produce Malaysian citizens, and the rest are there, being knowledgeable, competent, and so on and so forth. But I want to bring the note, achieving the high level of kesejahteraan diri. Yeah? That word kesejahteraan diri cannot be translated into any other language. Normally they say sejahtera is about well-being, but it is just one level of definition of what sejahtera is about. And we are saying there are many other levels or multi-layered sort of meaning of sejahtera that we need to find out and operationalize it. Why it is important? It is important because only with kesejahteraan diri, then you can contribute to the harmony and betterment of the family, society, and nation. Without sejahtera, you cannot contribute. And indeed, people who have not experienced peace will not be able to contribute to the peace of other people. Maybe something like Beckson was saying in terms of responsibility. How do you communicate when you yourself do not experience the thing that you are going to give to other people? And this is, I think, the whole question that we need to start asking as far as falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan is all about. Now, as I mentioned just now, as this falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan 1996 been amended, we have got another document from UNESCO called the 4 Pillars of Learning. And the 4 Pillars of Learning talks about different things, but it means almost the same to me. Learning to know about the cognitive way of acquiring knowledge. Yeah? Learning to do about the skills in trying to participate in activities around you. Right? These are the two things that we do very well in school. Learning to know, learning to do, and we measure them from the number of A's they've got, the kind of degrees they've got. Yeah? And the KPIs relates to this very, very closely. But there are other two pillars that we have not even touched, or if we touch it, we do not do it well. That is what learning to be is all about. Yeah? Learning to be here talks about self-analytical and social skill to enable individuals to develop the fullest potential, psycho-socially, effectively, as well as physically, for an all-round complete person. I want to underline this word, complete person. A whole person, as it were, not the kind of human capital that we've talked about. Yeah? And in the context of the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, the complete people is the four plus the values of sejahtera that we talked about. Yeah? Living to live together, to expose individuals to the values of implicit within human rights, democratic principle, intercultural understanding, respect and peace of all levels of society, human relationship, and to enable individuals and society to live in peace and harmony. These are the two things that I think we have not done terribly well. In fact, if at all, we have not even touched it. Any of our students can self-analyze themselves. What is the skill of coping in that particular context? I think there is not, because there's no KPIs to it. Yeah? There's no exams to it, and therefore it is left on its own. Learning to live together. 17 or 7 streams of schools in Malaysia will not encourage people to live together, particularly when the schools are organized in different, race basis or religious basis or whatever else. You will never get this intercultural learning that you talk about, yeah? The human relationship that you talked about, the democratic principles you talk about. It will never be realized in that particular sort of notion. So these are the two things that becomes of concern to me, particularly an international Islamic university. Do we have this on? We may have got learning to do, learning to be, learning to know, but do we have learning to be and learning to live together as per these 4 pillars of learning? And I can easily, I think, put the same values as far as the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. When you talk about learning to know, maybe it's about intellectual capacity. Learning to do, perhaps more on the physical side. Learning spirituality is about learning to be. Yeah? And emotional is about learning to live together. How do you make this relationship work to the best to create peace and harmony, as it were? And there is already this, correspondent sort of values. And again, Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan was produced 10 years before the 4 pillars of learning. And that shows how relevant the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan is until today, except that we have not made the connection the way we should have made it maybe 30 years ago. We look at the 4 pillars of learning. Another way of looking at it is about 1, the seat of intellect is up here. Learning to do is about skills and hand, and this is what we are taught, yeah? Cognitive, psychomotor, or what have you. And sometimes it is related to your IQ. Okay? And if you read a little bit more, perhaps there's an EQ into this. Okay? But there's also these other dimensions, which is learning to be, as we mentioned, it is about the heart. A new seed of intellects that Muslims do believe that there is revealed knowledge, not just reason knowledge. Where do you put this in the context of falsafah, pendidikan kebangsaan, and education? And this is where I think the corresponding perhaps is EQ and SQ at the same time. And this then will lead you to that learning to live together but in the context of sustainable development, not just to live together, but sustainability. In other words, your relationship not only with human beings, but other inhabitants, the plants, the animals, the creatures around you, yeah? And also the environment as far as sustainable development is concerned. And then we talked about this is where the values comes in. What are the values that we need that will then create a kind of an attitude that you can live sustainably with your environment at the same time. And you come back to this word in the falsafa, being holistic, being integrated. How is it that we can live in a holistic manner and integrated in the environment that we want? And then the word, the complete person then comes into picture. So at the end of the day, if you work this out, I can see there's a lot of relevance between what the falsafa is all about and what is the new thing in education in the context of sustainable development, not only the 4 pillars of learning. And this is where I think the construct that needs to be made. If you're to bring back the falsafa pendidikan kebangsaan into the next millennium and make it part and parcel of the framework of new Malaysia and the new education system that we are trying to create or recreate, as it were. How do you then begin to understand this in the context of the other relationships that we talked about? You often talk about university in a triple helix, yeah? That university must work with the government and must work with industry so that we can create a kind of innovation, again, for the economic means that we talked about. Or they said it will not work now, and we need to talk about a quadruple helix. What is new there? Basically, we need to add civil society. But the ambition is still the same. The objective is still the same, to be effective in so-called changes in the context of innovation and so on and so forth. Yeah? Given Sejahtera, we are suggesting not triple, not quadruple, but we talk about quintuple helix. What's the difference between this and the other two? Only that we say that the quintuple helix is not based on structures, be it government, be it industry, be it civil society, but it is based on values and virtues. Because what we're seeing today, if the government is corrupt, then the whole system gets corrupt. If the industry is corrupt, then the university gets corrupted at the same time. Yeah? So it's not the structures, but it is a value, which is back to the falsafa pendidikan kebangsaan, back to the 4 pillars of learning. Where do you embed the values in this quintuple helix? So that at the end of the day, it is beyond just innovation, beyond just the economic logics, but into creating a balanced community that we can have relation with, so that it also influences the whole global humanity at the same time. And this is the model that we are trying to work at the same time and trying to, put it into practice in this university, if we could, within the next 2 years or so. So we tried to map this. We know life, intellect, lineage, wealth, and faith is part and parcel of the value system that supports the falsafa pendidikan kebangsaan, at least on a micro level. The macro level, we can extend it. If there's life, there must be life that is dignified. It's no point having life which is not dignified, marginalized, defranchised, or whatever you have. The kind of disparities we see today, I think that's not the life that we talked about. So on a greater scale, we want that life to be dignified. Yeah? Intellectual will explore knowledge in the kind of the democratic way that Bud was describing. Yeah? And how do you make this available to other people so that it becomes part of life that could be dignified through knowledge, as it were. Yeah? New lineage, you're talking about the future generation. So this knowledge then will have its own contribution to the future. We are talking about sustainability. It's about not compromising the ability of the future to meet their own needs. How do you make that happen in the context of knowledge and keeping the dignity alive, as it were? Yeah? And for that, we need resources. And that resources is not just resources that belongs to you as a personal thing, but the resources that is shared, the air, the water, all other resources that we need to have now and also for the future, not only for one sector, but for the whole human dimension. And this is where the new Sustainable Development Goal talks about, not like the Millennium Development Goal, where we need to play catch-up game with developed countries, but now we know there's one planet, we need to share that resources so that the future can be ascertained through that kind of distribution as it were. And faith then will talk about a larger dimension of this sharing of spirituality above just ritual and understanding within a small dimension of so-called religion. Okay? So that will, at the end of the day, when you talk about this, the objective is therefore to serve justice, to bring back a just and equitable, balanced society. The final end point is, are we arriving at a point of justice, equitability? That is what the quintuple helix is all about, and how do you make this happen is an issue that I think we are now struggling with. Yeah? But basically is to understand, it is about the balance of being between the macro and the micro. Yeah? And not only that, within the micro, beginning to discover other set of balance. The balance between the mind and the heart. And in our education system, at least in Malaysia, the heart is not even there. Some people say the heart of education is education of the heart. But at what point do we educate the heart? How? In the context of the Quranic verse. Where is it that we are beginning to develop that? Because when you talk about revelation, it is about the heart that becomes a seat of intellect and nothing else. Yeah? So, in trying to make this and trying to explain this, the quintuple helix, therefore, will look something like this. At the local level, we talk about the 5 dimensions where justice is the end point. All these 4 elements that supports life, that supports intellectual, that supports future generation, wealth, and then faith at the same time. If you move on to another level, the global level, we probably change the terminology into a bigger dimension. As I mentioned, life, dignified life, intellect, broader knowledge, not just within your community, but other knowledge, the multiple knowledge resources that we talked about. How then it augurs for the future, not just one community, but the whole humanity. And then we talk about the larger resources. And this is where the spirituality comes in. Okay? When we connect this to the sustainable development goal, we begin to see, the sustainable development goal has 6 overarching goals. One is about dignity, the other one is about prosperity, rather equitable prosperity, justice, including historical justice or historical injustice, partnership, planet, and people. Some of them crafted in a different way just by limiting it to the 5 P's. Yeah? People, planet, prosperity, and the other 2 P's is about peace, which is including dignity and justice, being the dimension of that peace, and partnership. Right? If I take these 5 P's and then put it in the quintuple helix model that we talk about, of the 5 necessities, we probably can end up with this. We have life, which is dignified, and then it brings peace. When life is dignified, peace becomes almost certain. Okay? We talk about intellect, knowledge, it's about people that we're going to invest in. We talk about people is the asset. Normally we talk about people being the asset, they invest in knowledge. And that's what it is all about as far as education is concerned. Yeah? Lineage is about the future of what? Not only the human being, but also the planet that they lived in. And this is where sustainability becomes important. The one and only planet that all of us make its home, we need to preserve that for the future. And talk about resources, then resources is the shared resources so that it becomes, again, something that everybody can enjoy rather than a few and the rest are being left out because of that. Yeah? And for that, I think partnership becomes an issue. So we've got the 5 P's line up when we talk about this, movement from local to global and even to that sustainable development sort of model. The 5 P's that we talk about is basically a summarize in all these 17 goals. Yeah? When we talk to people around us, to talk about the 17 goals is mind-boggling. At least in our case also it's mind-boggling. 17 goals, 169 targets to be arrived at in the year 2030. People will say this is not possible. But the moment you reduce it to 5, you probably can find where the links is. All the 17 goals will relate to any of the 5, if not all of the 5. And we need to make that connection so that it becomes doable, so that it becomes viable in the context of making it happen within our own environment, and that's it. So I would like to end by saying that if you want to humanize education to the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, the first thing to realize is a bigger picture. And that's why I like the presentation today. It gives us a bigger picture. It's just not about this university, but this university in the context of the whole world. Where are we? Yeah? And then we move on slowly to reconstruct our own society. And from then on, we will move on to construct our own institution or our own family or whatever it is. And we go back to the individual, which is the macro sort of world that we talked about. And how do you connect this? We go back to that idea of the balance between the mindset and the heart set. Yeah? These two balance must be preserved, and that balance will answer to this whole Sejahtera model that we are trying to arrive at. So, if this is the proposed sort of model that we're going to work on, the quintuple helix, we are hopefully able to reverse this again. We begin to look at how do you reverse this from the unsustainable back to the wisdom that we have lost. I think we can do that in the context of moving back into the ecosystem, yeah? Getting back this culture of humility. I think in our context, in our culture, somebody talks about culture. A culture is about being humble. Our proverb like, ikut resmi padi lagi berisi lagi tunduk. Ya? Ular menyusul akar tidak akan hilang bisanya. That is a culture of humility, particularly for the educated. But we have lost that. Because our world tells us we need to have a good this and that, and the KPIs and the CVs. That's why I'm a little bit not very happy when you read about CVs. You're telling how good you are when you're actually not so good. That is CVs is all about. Yeah? If you are good, you are good. That's it. You don't have to read the CV. But this is the culture that we are embedded with. You must pad your CV sometimes because this is part of the arrogance that we are taught in the academic world. Yeah? How do you move back to being financially well-being, but you may not have the money, but you are good in terms of the human person. The money is not all that there is, and therefore working in university is not working as a salaried person. There's a lot of other things that we need to do in a kind of volunteering our time, giving our effort to other people who are not able to pay sometimes. And that is the role of the university, to bring education to where it should belong, including the communities around us that is waiting for us to go and help them while we learn from them at the same time. Right? And how do you move back to this whole logic economic, coming back to bringing wisdom to the universities? And wisdom, as you can see, is just beyond whatever we can count. And therefore, as far as the university is concerned, inshallah, next year we're going to dump the KPI. Yeah, we are working on it, how to get rid of the KPI, and so that we can work on the wisdom that we've talked about. Yeah? For the last 6 months, we've been struggling. Inshallah, 2019, we will tell you what KPIs, no KPIs. And it's again like what Beth said, it is about you at your kuliah. You need to determine what is it that the kuliah wants to do to arrive at the wisdom that we want to get at. Yeah? If you are thinking about numbers, then you might miss the wisdom again. So we are moving into that. We're going to dump the ranking. As far as the university is concerned, ranking is not part of our game, we'll throw it away. So these are the many things that we are thinking about, putting back the culture, as our friend said. Culture is about our lifestyle. And if you don't have that in, then I think we need to bring it in as far as this university is concerned. So those are a few things that we think about as how we make the shift so that we bring back the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, so that we move back from where we were to bring sejahtera in the context of what it is, as I've explained it to you. How do you work on the quadruple helix? There's something now being talked about. We will then perhaps again announce it to you earlier next year. Those are just the two things that I can mention to you about the 4 pillars of learning, the sustainable development goal, how we actually can make amends and make sure that falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan becomes alive again. But there are many other things. Yeah? As soon as we learn this today, we learned about STEM. Dato Osman talked about STEM. Yeah? Is it STEM or is it STEAM? STEAM to me is, STEAM to me is science, technology, ethics, arts and management, including the culture, aesthetic at the same time. The moment you know that, then you begin to see, are we moving into 4th industrial revolution, or are we moving to the 5th social revolution, as the Japanese just said? It depends on how you decide. Yeah? Now we learn a few more things. Responsibility. How do you fit this in? Yeah? But it's going to talk about the knowledge for change. Is knowledge for change, or is knowledge for just for the sake of knowledge? And if that's going to happen, then how do we then throw all those things or unlearn all those things that we don't need? And that is, I think, the purpose of why we are here today, in trying to bring back the falsafah in the context of making the challenges that we want to make. My question to you is, are we ready to make this challenge? My question to you, are we ready to be the game changer in the context of bringing whatever that is necessary to make the game change? Yeah? If we are not, then I think we need to go back and relearn what the falsafah is all about, so that we can make it easier and viable for the future. Sorry, a little bit long-winded, but thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Tan Sri. As always, very insightful and also very passionately said. Thank you very much for actually ending the session with the need for us to take into consideration the falsafah pendidikan negara and to create that humanizing education. Thank you so much. Our speakers have given us a lot of food for thought. It's a lot that we are bringing home from this conference, and certainly a lot for us to think about and to act on. I would like to thank all our speakers, Professor Budd, Dr. Hillinge, Dr. Martin, and Professor Tan Sri Zul, for their presentation and for their ideas and the impetus towards having us make the change in our society. I would like to take my discretion as the chairperson to not have a question and answer session. This is to take into consideration the fact that we need to have time for Friday prayers and lunch, or lunch and Friday prayers, and that we are going to move on to our first, final session for this morning of the declaration. We will start with Tan Sri Zul.
What do you want me to do? Yeah, this one. Okay. We're going to read to you a declaration that we thought it is necessary in conjunction not only with the IAU conference that was the last 3 days, yeah, but it's also connected with this one because the flow of discussion is almost the same. So this is the International Higher Education Declaration to support implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, right? It has been 3 years since the United Nations General Assembly adopted, through consensus, 17 Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by 2030. Progress in achieving these goals so far has been slow and siloed. These goals and associated 169 targets refer to a comprehensive reform and development agenda for all people in all countries of the world. Leave no one behind is not merely a slogan, but also commitment to made by all national governments to each other and the citizens of the world. And as universal goals, they apply to all countries, communities, and households.
It's okay, it's okay. While history has positioned higher education institutions as key drivers of change, conversations about sustainable development goals in higher education institutions have not been as robust and sustained as we would like so far. We believe it is now urgent that higher education institutions lead on the implementation of the SDGs through research, teaching, and learning, industry and civil and community engagement, therefore taking on a stewardship role towards achievement worldwide. We call upon higher education leaders worldwide, students, policymakers, research funding agencies, academics, industry, and civil society partners to commit to collaboration, cooperation, and action on the following 10-point plan.
The first point is for higher education institutions also to address the sustainable development goals through informed research and innovation initiatives that provide new and improved product, process, practice, or policy. So this is not only for higher education, but also for the students, the policymakers, the research funding agencies, and all the others mentioned above. To work with national government agencies responsible for the implementation of the SDGs to ensure cooperation, implementation of progression and impact. Incentivize and build capacity across the higher education sector and local communities for knowledge exchange to address the SDGs. To undertake a review of policy, infrastructure and protocols on campus to embed a culture and practice of reduce, reuse, and recycle. To introduce approaches to the study of the SDGs across programs at undergrad and graduate level. To engage research funding agencies to address the SDGs through funding for community university transdisciplinary teams involving civil society and industry. To promote personal reflection of students and faculty to take responsibility and action towards achievement in their own families and communities. To demonstrate university social responsibility by adopting and championing SDGs as basis of a good public institution anchored in society. To monitor progress towards achieving the SDGs in community-based and engaged research, teaching and learning across cities, provinces, countries, and globally. And finally, to develop a strategy to lobby conference organizers nationally and internationally to always include SDGs in conference themes and to call for presentations in cooperation with UNESCO offices, its specialized institutes, and also UNESCO commissions.
We believe that the combined intellectual, financial, and physical resources of higher education institutes with academics, policymakers, funders, administrators, and students, when linked to community partners, can have a significant impact on the implementation of the SDGs globally. Oh, okay, so it's been moved. No. There are several signatories and it will be on a website.
You can log on, and if you want to sign on it, I think there's a place for you to sign on it. Various universities, various organizations to support this particular declaration. Thank you.